Hello and welcome. Welcome to the basement. It's funny, as I walk through here, I feel like there was that guy, Billy Van. He was on a show called House of Frankenstein, and I feel like I'm the librarian. And he played all the characters pretty much. But the librarian in the library, boy, that must have been some set to get sorted. It was full of old books, funny candles, oh, all kinds of stuff. Now, it's funny, because as I go through this here, I was thinking, ow, maybe it's time to pull out this edition of Playboy and look and see where I might have been in this reading of Watergate. I think. Ooh, stop falling. Reading glasses on. Okay, I think it was here. The last thing I think we ended up with was the Miami Four were led off to jail. And then there's these three dots. Ow, this is not on right. But I'll see. If I'm reading the wrong thing, I'll see what I do. Anyway, but I think that's where I stopped. To continue with the Watergate story from the June 1974 edition of Playboy. And this article was written by Bob Woodward, and Carl Bernstein. That noon, Woodward took a cab back to the post for a lunch with Catherine Graham and Howard Simons. Catherine wants to go over some of the stories and ask about the sources. Mrs. Graham, the publisher, is the daughter of Eugene Meyer, who bought the paper in 1933 when her husband Philip Graham, who was the publisher of the Post, committed suicide. In 1963, she assumed. Oh, sorry, I must read that again. When her husband, Philip Graham, who was the publisher of the Post, committed suicide in 1963, she assumed control. Woodward was glad that Mrs. Graham had waited until after the intense period of major investigative stories and the attack by the White House in the fall before asking for a meeting. He took the elevator to the 8th floor and walked through the double glass doors onto the thick white carpet that led to her office. Simons was already there, a drink in hand, and the three of them sat down in the small office in one corner. "What's happening in the trial today?" Mrs. Graham asked. Woodward told her about the guilty pleas by the four Miami men and Sirica's interrogation. The trial was getting increasingly ridiculous, Woodward said, and he described the scene of the four men talking and nodding as if on cue. Mrs. Graham asked several questions about what it all might mean and what would happen. "Is it all going to come out?" she asked, somewhat anxiously. "I mean, are we ever going to know about all of this?" Woodward thought it was the nicest way possible of asking. "What have you boys been doing with my newspaper?" He said that he and Bernstein weren't sure it would ever come out. "Never?" she asked, apprehensively. "Don't tell me never." She laughed, throwing her head back with a bright smile. "Well, let's eat," she said, rising and leading them to the dining room directly behind her office. A woman in a traditional maid's uniform of black and white served eggs Benedict. Simons outlined the purpose of the lunch, a confidential discussion of the sources for the Watergate stories. Woodward had finished 2 bites of his eggs Benedict, and now he realized he was going to have to give a monologue. He told her about several Justice Department attorneys, an FBI agent, a White House aide, the bookkeeper, and Sloan. Mrs. Graham said she was less interested in the names than the positions they held. You're still on. Woodward said he had told no one the name of Deep Throat. Mrs. Graham paused. "Tell me," she said. Woodward froze. He said he would tell her if she wanted, but he was praying she wouldn't press it. Mrs. Graham laughed, touched his arm, and said she was only kidding. She didn't really want to carry that burden around with her. Woodward took a bite of his eggs, which were cold. "Now, about the Haldeman business," Mrs. Graham said, looking as if she were not sure she wanted to hear it. Woodward put down his fork and told the story of the mistake he and Bernstein had made about Sloane's grand jury testimony. Just a moment. I want to adjust this microphone so that I can possibly see better if it dies. Yes. Woodward put down his fork and told the story of the mistake he and Bernstein had made about Sloane's grand jury testimony. "But are you absolutely sure we're right?" The question carried an intensity absent from the previous conversation. "I remember talking with Henry Kissinger," she continued, "and he came up and said, 'What's the matter? Don't you think we're going to be reelected? You were wrong on Haldeman.' And he seemed upset and said something about it being terribly, terribly unfair." "If there's anyone who has not been wronged," Woodward said, "it is Bald Haldeman." It was the most definite statement Woodward made during the lunch. You know what I might do, because I am concerned I forgot to do things. Sorry. I'm going to turn on this other microphone. Watch it connect. Put it on here. Drop the magazine. Golly. Okay. Now I have to find where I was. Oh dear, this has not gone well. Okay, we're close. Okay, hang on. Why? Okay. Okay. Here we are. It was the most definite statement Woodward made during lunch. The trial lasted another 2 weeks. Woodward and Bernstein continued to attend, sifting through exhibits and papers filed with the court. Woodward copied the phone numbers from the defendant's address books, which were entered into evidence, and one evening he called some of the numbers. "The FBI?" one man asked. "They never contacted me. I never talked to them." Woodward slammed down the phone. "In the biggest, most wide-ranging investigation since the assassination of President Kennedy, the FBI didn't even call the numbers in the address books." While going through the list of witnesses, Woodward found one who knew Hunt quite well. He called the witness at his office and asked what he was going to testify about. The witness said, "I'll tell you what I could testify to, but Silbert won't ask. If the judge or any other attorney is due, I'll say it." Woodward sat up straight in the large blue chair at his desk and asked what that testimony might include. Howard always used "they" or "the White House" when he was talking about his activities, but one day I remember he was complaining about Ehrlichman and saying what an amateur Ehrlichman was, because Ehrlichman put on hold a lot of things Howard was doing, various secret intelligence type things. The operation was delayed for 2 or 3 weeks because Ehrlichman was holding up the budget. Ehrlichman, Woodward snapped a pencil in half between his fingers. And Howard was saying that was why he liked Coulson, because Coulson understood that such things are necessary. Coulson is an operator and gave immediate approval. He pushed the budget through. Coulson, that made sense. But Ehrlichman, Woodward lined up several neat rows of paper clips on his desk As the witness went on, from the comments Howard made, it was apparent that Mitchell was getting typed reports of the wiretaps. Okay, Woodward, that made sense. After the Woodward arrests, when Howard was out on the town hiding and needed a lawyer, he was looking for John Dean and said, "Let him get me a lawyer." Woodward's hand jerked through the neat rows of paper clips, destroying the symmetry. "John Dean?" he asked. "That's exactly how Silbert sounded when I told him," the witness said. He said, "That's the first time his tracks have appeared in this." Woodward took one of his large paper clips, bent it into a large L, and began twirling it in his hand as he read over his notes. At that moment, Bradley walked by his desk and asked what was up. "Maybe a whole lot, and maybe nothing," Woodward said. But there was at least one witness who could do some damage to Mitchell, Colson, Ehrlichman, and Dean. Bradley's eyes brightened. He did a little dance, holding an imaginary towel to his ass and wiggling it back and forth before walking off. All right, so that is where I will stop this time before I read more. So thanks for coming. We'll see you again back in the basement, where I'm continuing to attempt to declutter. Always a pleasure. We'll see you again soon. Bye for now.